Saṃsāra. Saṃsāra is a Sanskrit word that means wandering or world, with the connotation of cyclic, circuitous change. It also refers to the theory of rebirth and cyclicality of all life, matter, existence, a fundamental assumption of all Indian religions. Saṃsāra is sometimes referred to with terms or phrases such as transmigration, karmic cycle, reincarnation, and cycle of aimless drifting, wandering or mundane existence. The concept of Saṃsāra has roots in the Vedic literature, but the theory is not discussed there. It appears in developed form, but without mechanistic details, in the early Upanishads. The full exposition of the Saṃsāra doctrine is found in Shramanic religions such as Buddhism and Jainism, as well as the various schools of Hindu philosophy. After about the mid-1st millennium BCE, the Saṃsāra doctrine is tied to the karma theory of Indian religions, and the liberation from Saṃsāra has been at the core of the spiritual quest of Indian traditions, as well as their internal disagreements. The liberation from Saṃsāra is called moksha, nirvana, mukti or kaivalya. Etymology and terminology. Saṃsāra means wandering, as well as world, wherein the term connotes cyclic change. Saṃsāra is a fundamental concept in all Indian religions, is linked to the karma theory, and refers to the belief that all living beings cyclically go through births and rebirths. The term is related to phrases such as the cycle of successive existence, transmigration, karmic cycle, the wheel of life, and cyclicality of all life, matter, existence. Many scholarly texts spell Saṃsāra as Samsara. According to Monier Williams, Saṃsāra is rooted in the term sāyas, which means to go round, revolve, pass through a succession of states, to go towards or obtain, moving in a circuit. A conceptual form from this root appears in ancient texts as Saṃsāra, which means going round through a succession of states, birth, rebirth of living beings and the world, without obstruction. The term shortens to Saṃsāra, referring to the same concept, as a passage through successive states of mundane existence, a transmigration, metempsychosis, a circuit of living where one repeats previous states, from one body to another, a worldly life of constant change, that is rebirth, growth, decay and rebirth. The concept is then contrasted with the concept of moksha, also known as mukti, nirvana, nibbana or kaivalya, which refers to liberation from this cycle of aimless wandering. The concept of samsara developed in the Vedic times, and is traceable in the Samhita layers such as in sections 1.164, 4.55, 6.70 and 10.14 of the Rig Veda. While the idea is mentioned in the Samhita layers of the Vedas, there is lack of clear exposition there, and the idea fully develops in the early Upanishads. Damien Keown states that the notion of cyclic birth and death appears around 800 BCE. The word Saṃsāra appears, along with moksha, in several principal Upanishads such as in verse 1 3.7 of the Katha Upanishad, verse 6.16 of the Shvatara Upanishad, verses 1.4 and 6.34 of the Maitreya Upanishad. The word samsara is related to sāyasti, the latter referring to the course of mundane existence, transmigration, flow, circuit or stream. Definition and rationale. The word literally means wandering through, flowing on, states Stephen J. Laumakis, in the sense of aimless and directionless wandering. The concept of Saṃsāra is closely associated with the belief that the person continues to be born and reborn in various realms and forms. The earliest layers of Vedic text incorporate the concept of life, followed by an afterlife in heaven and hell based on cumulative virtues merit or vices demerit. However, the ancient Vedic rishis challenged this idea of afterlife as simplistic because people do not live an equally moral or immoral life. Between generally virtuous lives, some are more virtuous, while evil too has degrees, and the texts assert that it would be unfair for God Yama to judge and reward people with varying degrees of virtue or vices, in either or and disproportionate manner. They introduced the idea of an afterlife in heaven or hell in proportion to one's merit, and when this runs out, one returns and is reborn. This idea appears in ancient and medieval texts as the cycle of life, death, rebirth and rebirth, such as section 631 of the Mahabharata and section 6.10 of Devi Bhagavata Purana. History. The historical origins of a concept of a cycle of repeated reincarnation are obscure, but the idea appears in texts of both India and ancient Greece during the first millennium BCE. The idea of Samsara is hinted in the early Vedic texts such as the Rig Veda, but the theory is absent. The early textual layers of the Vedas mention and anticipate the doctrine of karma and rebirth. However, states Stephen Laumakis, the idea is not fully developed. It is in the early Upanishads where these ideas are more fully developed, but there too the discussion does not provide specific mechanistic details. The detailed doctrines flower with unique characteristics, starting around the mid-first millennium BCE, in diverse traditions such as in Buddhism, Jainism and various schools of Hindu philosophy. Some scholars state that the Samsara doctrine may have originated from the Shramana traditions and was then adopted by the Brahmanical traditions Hinduism. The evidence for who influenced whom in the ancient times is slim and speculative, and the odds are the historic development of the Samsara theories likely happened in parallel with mutual influences. Punarityu. Rebirth. While Saṃsāra is usually described as rebirth and reincarnation of living beings, the chronological development of the idea over its history began with the questions on what is the true nature of human existence and whether people die only once. This led first to the concepts of Punartthi and Punartthi return. These early theories asserted that the nature of human existence involves two realities, one unchanging absolute Atman soul, which is somehow connected to the ultimate unchanging immortal reality and bliss called Brahman, and that the rest is the always changing subject body, in a phenomenal world Maya. Rebirth, in the Vedic theosophical speculations, reflected the end of blissful years spent in Svarga or heaven, and it was followed by rebirth back in the phenomenal world. Samsara developed into a foundational theory of the nature of existence, shared by all Indian religions. Rebirth as a human being, states John Boker, was then presented as a rare opportunity to break the sequence of rebirth, thus attaining moksha, release. Each Indian spiritual tradition developed its own assumptions and paths marga or yoga for this spiritual release, with some developing the ideas of jivan mukti liberation and freedom in this life, while others content with vidhamukti liberation and freedom in afterlife. The Shramana's traditions Buddhism and Jainism added novel ideas. Starting about the 6th century BCE, they emphasized human suffering in the larger context, placing rebirth, rebirth and truth of pain at the center and the start of religious life. Samsara was viewed by the Shramanas as a beginningless cyclical process with each birth and death as punctuations in that process, and spiritual liberation as freedom from rebirth and rebirth. The Samsaric rebirth and rebirth ideas are discussed in these religions with various terms, such as Gatagati in many early Pali suttas of Buddhism. Evolution of ideas. Across different religions, different soteriology were emphasized as the Saṃsāra theories evolved in respective Indian traditions. For example, in their Saṃsāra theories, states Obasikir, the Hindu traditions accepted Atman or soul exists and asserted it to be the unchanging essence of each living being, while Buddhist traditions denied such a soul exists and developed the concept of anatta. Salvation moksha, mukti, in the Hindu traditions was described using the concepts of Atman self and Brahman universal reality, while in Buddhism nirvana, nibbana, was described through the concept of anatta no self and niyat emptiness. The Ajivika tradition combined Saṃsāra with the premise that there is no free will, while the Jainism tradition accepted the concept of soul, calling it jiva, with free will, but emphasized asceticism and cessation of action as a means of liberation from Saṃsāra it calls bondage. The various sub-traditions of Hinduism and of Buddhism accepted free will, avoided asceticism, accepted renunciation and monastic life, and developed their own ideas on liberation through realization of the true nature of existence. Samsara in Buddhism, Saṃsāra in Buddhism, states Jeff Wilson, is the suffering-laden cycle of life, death, and rebirth, without beginning or end. Also referred to as the wheel of existence Bhavakakra, it is often mentioned in Buddhist texts with the term Punarbhava rebirth, re-becoming. The liberation from this cycle of existence, nirvana, is the foundation and the most important purpose of Buddhism. Samsara is considered impermanent in Buddhism, just like other Indian religions. Karma drives this impermanent samsara in Buddhist thought, states Paul Williams, and short of attaining enlightenment, in each rebirth one is born and dies, to be reborn elsewhere in accordance with the completely impersonal causal nature of one's own karma. This endless cycle of birth, rebirth, and rebirth is Saṃsāra. The Four Noble Truths, accepted by all Buddhist traditions, are aimed at ending this samsara-related re-becoming, rebirth, and associated cycles of suffering. Like Jainism, Buddhism developed its own samsara theory that evolved over time. The mechanistic details on how the wheel of mundane existence works over the endless cycles of rebirth and rebirth. In early Buddhist traditions, Saṃsāra cosmology consisted of 5 realms through which wheel of existence recycled. This included hells Mraya, hungry ghosts Pretas, animals Tiryak, humans Manushya, and gods Devas, heavenly. In latter traditions, this list grew to a list of 6 realms of rebirth, adding demigods Asuras. The hungry ghost, heavenly, hellish realms respectively formulate the ritual, literary and moral spheres of many contemporary Buddhist traditions. The Saṃsāra concept, in Buddhism, envisions that these 6 realms are interconnected, and every one cycles life after life, and death is just a state for an afterlife. Through these realms, because of a combination of ignorance, desires and purposeful karma, or ethical and unethical actions. Nirvana is typically described as the freedom from rebirth and the only alternative to suffering of samsara. In Buddhism, however, the Buddhist texts developed a more comprehensive theory of rebirth, states Stephen Collins, from fears of rebirth, called amata, death-free, a state which is considered synonymous with nirvana.